Give everyone time to find their seats again from lunch, get your stretches in. All right, welcome back from lunch, everyone. I hope everyone that was on Zoom also had a fantastic time to eat. As a restate, my name is Jeremy Kiefer, and I have the immense privilege of getting to introduce our next speaker. In the previous presentation, one of the things I really discussed and pointed out was the importance of mentors in our personal life as positive childhood experiences, but it's also equally important for those of us at the professional level. And the person, again, I get the opportunity to present for and introduce to you all is Dr. Ronsonlyn Clark, who has been a fantastic mentor for me professionally. And for many of you in the recovery community that have had the opportunity to read her work or speak with her, you know that she is an absolute wealth of information. Another item that we discussed was how issues at the individual level will feed up as gambling harms to a relational and community level. And the topic that Dr. Clark is going to speak on is not just related to interpartner or domestic violence, but family violence as a whole. So I'll take it away for her that the topic we'll be speaking on now is gambling and family violence.
Thank you, Jeremy. Before I get started, I'd like to ask Dr. Whelan if he would come back up here. We usually have a small token that we present to our speakers, and I did not have this first thing this morning, so I would like to present you with this gift card.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. We appreciate you. I will be speaking today about family violence. We did discuss in the beginning when we were doing our planning for the conference that this would be about domestic violence, and I thought that was just too narrow. I started my work in dealing with disordered gambling in 1998. If you read that colored brochure, you'll see an article I wrote in there. I attended training in Bardstown, Kentucky, and having come from, at that point, 19 years, I believe, in working in substance abuse. And I went to this training and I met the folks there and I said, these are my people. I love these people. And the thing that struck out to me the most at that time, I was working with a lot of women in a spouse abuse shelter, and I was working with a lot of women who were in prison. And I said, there's gotta be something that correlates with this. And so I began to do some pseudo research at that point. And some of this today is a result of the work that I started in 1998. None of it's published, a lot of anecdotal things, but I do believe that if we are going to provide treatment for a person living with a gambling disorder, we have to provide treatment for the entire family or we miss our mark. I see some of my folks out here saying yes, so I'm glad you're agreeing with me. A long time ago, I was told it, and I believe it to be true. I also believe it to be true, you better know what you're doing when you're doing family work, and there is even a hint of domestic violence that could be happening inside that home. You can cause more harm than you can cause good. So with that said, I would like to tell you that we in Owensboro, there's a few people from Owensboro here, we just got our historical horse racing venue, just opened up right at a month ago. I think it was February 16th. And I was gonna try to get a clip of it and add it to my PowerPoint showing this, but I'm glad I didn't because we're having a little trouble with the videos. The day that it opened up, it was cold in Owensboro. It was very cold and it was rainy. My husband, who's here with me, we went to eat lunch at a local diner that day, which is always overflowing. We went in there, there were tables everywhere open. And I asked some of the staff there, where is everybody? It was Wednesday, it was fried chicken day. They sell out of that stuff. And I said, where is everybody? And they said, we think they're probably out at the new gaming place. And so that night on the news, we saw the opening day. It's cold. It was probably in the 20s, low 30s, and it's a drizzly rain. And these individuals out there for opening day were wrapped around the building. They took the camera inside as people were going in to be the first to get in there to play activities that day. And I watched it and I thought, this looks like Best Buy on Black Friday. And I saw a little bit of pushing and shoving, not quite as bad as Best Buy Black Friday, but I did see some pushing and shoving. And all I could think about at that point was my presentation. How many of you today, tomorrow, the next day are going to leave this place or somewhere similar and go home and some kind of violence take place? And I was incredibly saddened at watching this. I have mentioned to officials in our community, to people that will listen to me, we've got to get our domestic violence shelter up and ready for this. Because one of the things that Dr. Whelan mentioned, so many good things this morning, he talked about Tunica, Mississippi. Along the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, when they opened those riverboats up, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, that first year rose 300%. My small community and our shelter can't handle that kind of capacity. So I think it's upon us. We're going to see these family victims, men and women and children victims in our offices, and we have to know what we're doing with it. Harmful gambling involves the family in many ways. Families of problem gamblers are more likely to experience forms of domestic violence, and studies report high correlations between domestic violence and harms associated with gambling. Problem disordered gamblers can be both victims and perpetrators. When I teach classes on depression, I say depression actually makes you depressed. It feeds itself. And my example, I don't do graphic arts like Jeremy. I do more describing things, painting pictures and telling stories. My mother always made yeast bread when I was a child. She was known in our community where I grew up for making yeast bread. My mother was also burned very badly, and they didn't think she was even going to have any fingers left after being burned. And this was a form of therapy to knead that yeast bread with her hands. And she was so good at it. And people came from all around to get a loaf of her bread. I was tired of it. I didn't care anything about that yeast bread. But what I watched her do was fold that bread back over on itself and let that yeast keep feeding itself. That's what happens with depression. That's what happens with violence in these families where there's gambling. The gambling causes the violence, and in many cases, the violence causes gambling to happen. It's a two-way street. Conflicts arise over financial problems and result oftentimes in physical altercations, with people likely to lash out. Children are affected by the harms of gambling in a home, and a child can easily become the target of what their parents are doing. So as I said, we're going to have a little special speaker. I'm going to cut mine a little short today. You have in your packet, I'm going to go through some of these slides very, very quickly. So I want you to see these are the learning objectives that we have and how they interplay with what we are looking at in this class today. What exactly is a family? Family can be a lot of different things. I had someone in my office yesterday, I said, who is your family? He has a biological mother. His father was deceased. He has some siblings. He said, I have nobody. He lives in a sober living facility that would have what we would call, recovery brothers in the sober living. I have nobody. But in essence, most of us do have families. It can be biological relatives, partners, exes. It can be a same-sex partner, it could be a roommate, it can be your children, it can be stepchildren, siblings, families, friends, co-workers. All of these people interplay with you, and they interplay with the gambler. I think it was said earlier today about 6 people. When I talk to my groups about gambling, I say anywhere from 5 to 30 people become directly affected by your gambling. As I said, it's a vicious cycle. Gambling leads to violence for some, and violence leads to gambling for others. We talk about intimate partner violence. What do most families, what do most couples fight about? Money. What's this doing right here? It's going to be fights about money. We have several instances of intimate partner violence. I can get my pages straight. They copied awfully funny on here. The relationship between intimate partner violence is very complex, and it's influenced by financial instability. Remember, like Jeremy said, most of these homes are under, I usually say $50,000 that are doing the most of the gambling. Along with financial instability, many of them are full of mental health issues and substance abuse issues. So what do we see? Problem gamblers are more likely to perpetrate or experience intimate partner violence compared to non-gamblers. It is a higher rate in gambling families. Studies will suggest that anywhere from 25 to 50% of problem gamblers report involvement with intimate partner violence as either a perpetrator or a victim. 25 to 50%. When I first became interested in the whole role of violence in the realm of gambling, I interviewed those women that I had at the spouse abuse shelter, and I interviewed a handful of women that I had at the prison, and I asked them, and my numbers, and I think this was probably a skewed sample, but like I said, I didn't publish it. It just, I wanted to see. And my numbers were running over 50%. So very, very high. Studies suggest that gambling-related stress will increase household conflict. The more conflict you have in the house, the more likely you are to have IPV. Problem gambling is linked to rates of anger, impulsivity, and substance abuse, which are also risk factors for intimate partner violence. Economic control is one of the forms of control that many perpetrators will use. And women in relationships with problem gamblers report higher levels of coercive control and financial abuse. I'm going to echo again what Dr. Whelan said this morning. Most of the research that we know and we deal with in anything about gambling comes from outside of the United States. Australia, New Zealand, and Canada seem to be leading us and leaving us behind. I think what we have, I don't know, I don't know why we don't do the amount of research in problem gambling that other places do. So a lot of what I'm going to report to you today is coming from other countries. What do family members say? Family members report feelings of betrayal, feelings of isolation, desperation, fear, and ongoing anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. There's a really good book out, and it's an old book. I don't even know if it's still in print, but the lady that wrote it is Katie Cunningham, and I've mentioned this in other trainings that I've done. The book is called Nicotine Dreams, and in this, she talks about her very unhappy marriage, and her way of escaping the marriage for a variety of reasons was to go to a casino. It got her out of the house. It caused her escape. And she was also able to smoke at the casino at the time. It's an older book. It's a quick read. You can read it in less than an hour. And I encourage you to take a look at what they're saying in there. When a gambling problem is revealed, when it's finally discovered. Financial stress is already acute, and the problem is not usually disclosed until it reaches a crisis point. I will never forget sitting in one of these conferences several years ago, and the former Baltimore Colts football player, Art Schleister, his wife was at the conference, and she talked about the financial problems they had in their marriage. Woke up I believe it was a Saturday morning, woke up that morning to knocks at the door, and they were coming to evict her from her home, and she had no idea. This is reaching a crisis point. Talk a lot about secrecy. We as substance abuse professionals in here are used to secrecy within our realm of drug addiction, but I think when you're working with gamblers, it takes it a few layers even deeper. Secrecy plays a significant role in gambling, influencing both the individual behavior and the broader gambling industry. So how so? Within individual gamblers, secrecy allows gambling addiction to thrive. As individuals begin to hide their losses, debt, and the frequency of their gambling. This secrecy delays the start of interventions and support and counseling. We also look at what secrecy does surrounding shame and stigma. Many gamblers keep their activities secret due to social and cultural stigma, leading to isolation and increased financial or emotional stress. If you are, and I'm using old terminology here, but it makes sense to me, some of those of you that have been around for a while have probably used this too, when we refer to gamblers as escape gamblers and action gamblers, this feeds right into that escape gambler, exacerbating that secrecy, that stigma, that shame, that isolation, driving those escape gamblers into whatever venue it was. Usually, most of them liked casinos because they could be one-on-one and become to the point of disassociation with a machine. Secrecy also includes illegal gambling. Regions where gambling is restricted or illegal, secrecy is essential for participation. This can expose individuals to fraud, unfair odds, or criminal activity. Before September of 2023, that's been like a big date in my mind. That changed a lot of things in Kentucky. Some things for the good, like Mike said. We've got Emily, and we've got, an availability of money to help us promote advocacy, prevention, and treatment for the disordered gambler. But before that time, I lived right on the Ohio River, and any time of the day or night, you could cross that river, and sitting in a gravel parking lot with nothing else there, 10, 15 cars any given time that were doing sports gambling, because that was in Indiana and it was legal to do it in Indiana. Casinos and gambling industry, again, as a member of the Kentucky Council, I take no position on whether gambling is good or bad. To me, gambling exists. My job is to provide treatment. But I also know that we have good, responsible partners, and we've got them listed here. They reach out to us when someone at their venue is getting into trouble. The casino doesn't want somebody sitting there playing games until they wet their pants because they won't leave the particular seat. They don't want somebody there because they won't leave the next one's going to be the win, and they've got kids in the car in the parking lot. They don't want you in there as an addicted gambler. They want you to come, drop your 50, 100, whatever is expendable cash, like we've talked about, and then go home. It was a night of entertainment. It's not meant to be 36 hours straight sitting on a vinyl seat. But they also have some pretty good marketing people there. Pretty smart marketing people that do a lot of things to make it a different kind of an experience. Somebody was talking about the carpet here last night, and I just looked down and I said, kind of reminds me a little bit of a casino, because the carpets are crazy in casinos. You get fresh oxygen pumped in. There's no clocks in a casino. There's no access to outside light. You don't know if it's day or night. So the people in there, it's easy to become disassociated. It's easy to get caught up in things. The industry often downplays the risks of gambling. And kudos to Indiana. I love Indiana. They are good partners. We have been in a relationship for many, many years, and I just love them. They are doing a great job with their lottery. I was impressed with what Kate said in there. And I think our lottery does good. I've gotten calls from people at the lottery said, there's a person in here, we think you need to talk to them. And then they'll go out of their way to get that person to me. You know, a liquor store doesn't usually do that. I hadn't had a dope dealer call me and say, I got somebody that's really, getting a lot of fentanyl or a lot of meth here. I think you need to see him. But I have had gaming industry do that. There's a lot of hidden fees and fine print. And this is some more of the secrecy that goes on. We opened this place in Owensboro 4 weeks ago. I guess it was 4 weeks yesterday. I finally got to catch the bottom of the TV screen. They were advertising the place, and everybody keeps hearing, well, you're getting free play. You get $90 in free play. But you know what? In order to get that $90 in that little bitty print, you have to go there 5 times over the course of 4 weeks. That's keep you coming through the door. Also, an even littler print under that was 1-800-GAMBLER is the hotline to call. This picture says a lot to me, and there's a couple of typos in here, and I apologize, but I just want to read this slide, and I want you to look at the picture. Imagine living in a home where there are endless fights about money, inconsistent or absent parents, or abusive behavior. Maybe there is no food in the house, or it was just discovered that the college fund or the 401k is missing. Maybe the foreclosure sign has just been planted on the front lawn, or the police have come to the home to arrest a parent. These are just the visible traumas that can occur in a family where there's a problem gambler. I love this picture. It just says so much to me. Few statistics I want to go over here. A woman whose partner had a gambling problem, whose partner has a gambling problem, is 10.5 times more likely to be a victim of intimate partner violence. If the partner is also a drinker, has a drinking problem, that percentage goes to 50.4 times. That's huge. Over a third of persons with gambling problems report being victims of intimate partner violence or perpetrators. And I think those numbers are a little bit low. 11% of offenders of intimate partner violence report that they also have gambling problems. What we see is a twofold issue: the stress and strain of living with a person with a problem gambling family member results in heightened risk of family violence. And so some people, as a way to cope with that heightened risk of family violence, will develop a coping mechanism of going to gamble. And it seems like in families where the female is the gambler, the male is generally less likely to stick around. In families where the male is the gambler, the female is more likely to stick around. Several factors seem to exacerbate the relationship: the level of impulsivity, the risk-taking, the anger problems, drug or alcohol use, and the mental health issues. So all of these are interplaying when you get into this family. Here's a little bit from the U.S. studies. Pathological gambling, and this is an old term. We no longer use that term pathological. You can see this study is from 2010. But it said that gambling was associated, so disordered gambling was associated with a 4-fold increase in perpetuating severe physical dating violence and a 20-fold increase for severe physical marital violence. So now, we've talked a little bit about intimate partner, and we're bringing in now the dating violence, the whole realm of dating violence. As Jeremy presented, youth are at high risk. We do, and Emily, you may have to help me on some of this. We provide the KIP survey here in Kentucky, and that's the Kentucky Incentive Program, is it? It's what? Might be program. This is done in 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th grade. Every 2 years, they survey the same kids. And we're seeing 6th graders gambling. You're like, no, they're not. Yeah, they are. And by the time they get in 12th grade, we're looking at fairly significant amount of kids who are gambling and have gambled in the last 30 days. You're thinking, no, no, no. I remember at one of our conferences, we had Julie Hines here, and she talked about working with a youth under the age of 18 who already had a $10,000 debt. So we're seeing a lot coming up out of youth. Yes, Jeremy?
It's Kentucky Incentives for Prevention.
Kentucky Incentives for Prevention. Thank you. It's been a while since I've worked in prevention, so. We also see, and this is Dowling studies that we've had, intimate partner violence perpetration increased not only with pathological gambling, but with milder gambling problems. And if we go in with our terminology in the DSM now, you know, we look at mild, moderate, and severe. So we might be in moderate and maybe even some mild gambling problems. You're going to see an increase in the violence. And the gambling problems tripled the likelihood of perpetrating physical intimate partner violence. These studies, I wanted to show you several studies. They do seem to overlap and say pretty much, you know, so you can make the statistics be whatever you want them to be, but I wanted you to see where we're coming from with this. Those who are caught perpetrating family violence or caught in addiction display many parallel behaviors and outcomes. There's not a lot, there's differences, but there's not a lot of differences between drug use, alcohol use, and gambling disorders. What we see that are similar is an inability to control impulses, even in the face of adverse consequences. Somebody mentioned prefrontal cortex this morning. I think we got an involvement of the prefrontal cortex, but we've also got an involvement of the midbrain that's living to exist, having you exist for the next 15 seconds. So we've got to address the whole brain chemistry. If you ever get the opportunity to watch John Grant and see him talk about any of this brain chemistry, he's phenomenal, phenomenal. The inability to control impulses, even in the face of adverse consequences, tolerance and withdrawal. Yes, there is some withdrawal when you stop gambling. People say, how's that? You ask a gambler how they feel a week or 2, 3 weeks after they stop. It's kind of along the lines of cannabis use disorder. You start to feel irritable, restless, discontent. You just, going on inside you, and that's not a very good clinical term there. You just can't, you don't feel good. You don't feel good. So you do have some mild, what we would consider some mild withdrawal. It involves the entire family. Preoccupation, obsession, defense reactions such as denial, minimization, and rationalization. All right, studying to look at some of the foreign studies. This is a study done in Australia on 141 adults seeking help. They used 3 measurements. They used the hurt, insult, scream scale for domestic violence. They used the PGSI. I use the PGSI. I teach a group at my employment. I did group twice this week. I had 10 guys in each group, and I went over kind of basics of what gambling is, did the PGSI, and I let them self-score. Maximum score you can get on this is 27. I had one guy with a 24. We've known for years and years, and GA, Gamblers Anonymous, will tell you this, up to about a third of members of AA really would also qualify for GA. In 2 days, 2 different sets of 10 men in each group that's identified. I had some people that didn't tell me, but I had 3 men in each group with severe gambling issues. 30% right there. Then they also use the coping motivation questionnaire. So that's how they assessed this 141 adults. And the results, 18.4 reported being a victim of family violence, and 19.1 admitted to acts of violence against their family, including, and we'll talk about this again in a few minutes, their parents. So now we've talked about children abuse that goes on, and we'll talk some more about that. We've talked about dating abuse, dating violence scenes. We're talking about partnering with someone, so intimate partner violence. And now we're going to bring in elder violence. And I don't like that term because I'm at that point in my life. Gambling individuals with more severe gambling problems had a greater chance of being a victim of family violence if the victimization, if they drank moderate to high levels of alcohol and they did not regularly gamble or reduce to, and if they did not regularly gamble to reduce or escape negative emotions. So got to look at that alcohol, and that's not a surprise to any of us either, what's happening with the alcohol in the families. Another study from Australia, this one had 212 participants. Up to a quarter of those participants saw that they had been victims of more than one violent family member. And I think that's pretty scary, not just one person. We've got a New Zealand study here. This was of 370 adults in 3 different treatment centers. We don't have a lot of treatment centers in this country. In Kentucky, there is no residential treatment center. Dream of mine, hint, hint. My boss is sitting here. At these 3 different treatment centers, they had 84 adults also who were affected by others gambling. They used the PGSI and the HITS scales. 46.8% of the gamblers and 65.5% of the affected others reported being a victim of family violence. 42% of the gamblers and 51% of the affected others reported they had committed family violence. And the most common, according to this study, was verbal and emotional abuse. If you've done any work at all around family violence and abuse, you know most survivors will tell you the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse is far worse. Bruises and broken bones and cuts will heal. It's that mental stuff that sticks there with you. This is a study that was done, a meta-analysis, so we're looking over 53 different studies of gambling in Australia again. And they had 4 main areas that they were looking at: how gambling affects the health of a partner, how gambling affects a partner's relationship with the gambler, how it affects the friends. So now we've got another layer we're adding to family violence, how it affects the friends of gamblers, and if help seeking, and the help seeking by friends and family. A lot of times the gambler is not the one that calls the hotline and says, I need some help. A lot of times it's the family or the friends. So what we see with this, partners suffered a lot of emotional pain that led to anxiety, depression, and anger. There was a lot of alcohol, a lot of nicotine use, poor physical health, such as headaches, backaches, and high blood pressure. And I'm going to take an aside on this one because we're talking about the survivors of the violence, having headaches, high blood pressure, backaches, physical health problems. If you have sitting in your office as a clinician someone with disordered gambling, you really ought to take a good physical health assessment. We're not physicians, but talk to them about their physical health because you probably have someone who is headed on a path towards a heart attack, stroke, or something, some kind of major something. I've seen it in my office, and it scared me enough that I am going to continue to evaluate for that. And I think us as looking at holistic approaches to dealing with disordered gambling, we have to consider the physical health of the gambler when we have them. Younger children engaged in more risky behaviors in these homes where there was gambling, including things like smoking and drinking. And we're talking younger children. It doesn't give us an age. They had more mental health issues, tended to hide their emotions. That's not good. That's not good. We're setting them up for situations later in life that will be problematic for them. Adult children tended to move away so the gambling parent could not ask for money. So let's put some distance between us. And concerned others often encourage the gambler to seek help and offered help to take over the finances. That's a risky thing, and I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. I wanted to throw some stuff in here about sports betting that I have found to be absolutely very, very, very interesting. What we see with sports betting, if I can get my notes straight here. On May 14th, 2018, the Supreme Court, in a case Murphy versus the National NCAA, overturned PAPSA, which was the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act of 1992. After this ruling is when sports gambling started to explode. There are two distinct ways to do sports gambling. You can go to retail or in-person betting. And of course, we know and hear more and more about the mobile sports betting. So what happened with this? This is pretty cool stuff. Research into domestic violence has found that when a professional football team has an unexpected loss, intimate partner violence in its home market increases by 10%. What they looked at was from noon, so that's, and I'm in Central Time, so at noon when the kickoff happens, until midnight. Let's say I don't like Kansas City. Anybody here Kansas City fans? I'm sorry if you are. My team's not very good. I'm Colts. I told you I love Indiana. Let's say you live in the Kansas City market. Kansas City's playing, who did you tell me the Browns? Somebody not very good. Who's not somebody not very good? Colts. They could be playing the Colts. Cincinnati. Somebody not, the Chiefs are playing somebody not very good. Chiefs are like, this is a gimme win right here. It's a home game. Titans, yeah. You're going to go out and you're going to bet on the Chiefs. And Patrick Mahomes gets hurt in the first quarter and they lose the game. Domestic violence just went up in the Kansas City region by 10%. This was a study that was done by the University of Oregon in 2011, and they have replicated that research again in 2024. The research at the University of Oregon dug deeper into that and found that this effect is amplified in states where sports betting is now legal. The effect is also larger in states where there's mobile betting, where higher bets were placed around paydays and for teams on a winning streak. Like I said, Kansas City, winning streak. It's an unexpected loss. I thought it was real interesting. I did not go. I didn't go to Kroger's, since I generally don't shop at Kroger's. But my friend went to Kroger's the day before the Super Bowl, and that was around the time I was preparing this presentation, because I wasn't supposed to be doing it. So I was like, hurry up and get this so Mike could get it printed. My friend went to Kroger's, and I was telling her about reading about the NFL and how this all worked out. And she said, well, I find it really interesting when I went into Kroger's today that they were like doing their round up your amount of money and donations to the local spouse abuse shelter. She said, do you think that was something that it was just a fluke or they purposely did this? I said, I don't know. I don't know. But go back to that. I would say, and I don't know, but I would say Kansas City was probably probably the more preferred team to win. And then when they didn't, I don't know. I haven't seen the statistics that came out of the domestic violence for that day. But keep that in mind when you're looking at sports days. So what do we see? Coping mechanisms. Domestic violence may lead to gambling addiction. Several studies that support the view that men gamble for enjoyment and to win while women gamble for escape. Gaming venues such as casinos, riverboats, and bingo halls become a refuge from violence. And how sad is that? You know, the most dangerous time for a woman in a domestic violence situation is when she decides to leave, when she makes that first step out the door. We don't have very many shelters in our country. There are more, and I am a huge animal lover, there are more animal shelters than there are spouse abuse shelters. And it's getting harder and harder to get into them. I've tried in our community to get someone in, and they had a violent situation, and they were full. And besides, when you get down to it, why should she have to leave anyway if it's the she? It's her home. And the whole thing around domestic violence comes from, this is the person that you're supposed to love more than anybody, and they're supposed to love you. This is a promise, a covenant that you've made, and now it's broken. There's so much emotional baggage that goes with all this violence that happens. So, coping mechanism may be to start gambling. Might need to explore that if you're doing any kind of counseling with someone who has left their home because of violence. The survivor who gambles, only a majority of women, and it does tend to lean towards women because more women are victims than men, and I'm not discounting the fact that men can be victims of domestic violence. I've seen it, I've worked with them, I know it exists. But about 90% of it is women being victims that turn into survivors. Only a minority of women interviewed first experienced intimate partner violence after they started gambling. Their gambling is an escape. They were already experiencing it. A more common pattern was for these violent instances to occur in context of coercive control. Women in other studies have described gambling to cope with an abusive intimate relationship, and in some cases they faced more violence after they began gambling. That makes just a whole lot of sense if you ask me. The effects on the children. Children of people with gambling problems are exposed to a range of family stressors. Early exposure and vulnerability to these kids. It can create interest in gaming. We've mentioned loot boxes already this morning. Those video games that mimic gambling that their parents are doing, they're imitating what they see their parents doing. Gambling for children is more accessible, and for adolescents is more accessible. Early exposure can increase the risk of developing gambling disorders later in life. I do FOO mapping, and I bet some of you do that too. FOO is family of origin mapping. Let's look and see what's happening in these families. What kinds of addiction are in there? So I have them draw out their parents, their aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, go up to the grandparents level, and if they have children. Now let's see how much alcohol is in this family, how much drug addiction is this family, and then I have them also look at other things, but one of them is gambling. And it's very, very common in these very complex families. Youth and older adults are the fastest growing segments of our population that are gambling. Some of this research indicates that self-reported rates of adolescent gambling in other countries like Italy is about 36%. And in Iceland, I think it was interesting, we had the Icelandic model. Iceland's youth gambling is around 78%. So very high. We have psychosocial consequences as well, substance use, mental health disorders, academic problems happening in these kids in homes where there was gambling. I've had adults that come to me for the treatment of gambling who said, I started gambling when I was 10 years old. It was always going on in our home. I just watched what the adults were doing. Children of individuals with gambling problems experience all kinds of issues. What they see is the financial instability, whether you believe they know what's going on, they do. Gambling can deplete family resources. The kids may end up going to work to try to help the family, and these kids do not bond well and do not make healthy social relationships. Children whose parents have gambling problems may experience crisis or chaos. Chronic disappointment from broken promises, abuse, neglect, and inconsistent parenting. Think about that picture I had you look at. Children are 4 times more likely to develop gambling problems as adults, and not understanding the gambling problem for the child can lead to taking sides with one parent or another. They may blame themselves, and they may try to help, like I said, by working or believing that gambling is their fault. That's heavy-duty stuff for a little kid. Being a parent with a gambling problem does not necessarily mean you're a poor parent, but there are instances where this does happen. Over half of people in a review that was done, this was another Australia study, over half of them gamblers reported perpetrating violence against their children. Feelings that happen in there are isolation, abandonment, hurt, rejection, anxiety, and inadequacy. They may believe that if they are good, that things will stop. And that makes that very difficult for the family. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because you've got it in your packet, but this is as we go through the stages and phases of someone developing a gambling disorder. This is what happens to the significant other. As the gambler increases their level of gambling and the stress and the turmoil in the home happens, we see what happens to the significant other. I do want you to take a look at this last column on this one, the effects on the family members' health and well-being. Look at the children. Depression, hopelessness, confusion, guilt, anxiety. These are emotional things that the kids are going through. Physical complaints, asthma, allergy, chronic headaches. What happens behaviorally? We see runaways, substance use, poor performance in school, and often going on to commit illegal acts. Another study, and I'm trying to hurry because I want to get our special guests up here. Generational issues, people with gambling fathers. When I did those 2 groups earlier this week and I had all men in there, I hit this one hard with them because I wanted them to see. You know, how many times have we heard a substance abuser say, I'm not hurting anybody, I'm just doing this to myself. The gamblers will do the same thing, I'm not hurting anybody. People with gambling fathers, 11 to 14 times more likely to have a gambling problem. So a child with a gambling father. A child with a gambling mother, I'll probably get the women in group next week. 7 to 11 times more likely to have a gambling problem. That's significant if you ask me. Averaging in there, right at 10, 11%, that this is going to cause problems with their children. Some risk and protective factors: gambling at a young age, parental drug use, parental mental health, their own personal drug use. Look at some protective factors. Being female seems to be somewhat protective. I think over the years this will probably be a less protective factor. Having higher social resources and networks. Think about the guy that I said, he kept saying yesterday, I don't have nobody. I don't have nobody. And really and truly, I don't think he does. He was incredibly sad. He worried me. I stressed about him. Having more siblings, I guess you can kind of spread it around. And expecting gambling will lead to a negative outcome. I know that if I understand it as a kid, I know this is a fun thing to do and it's going to be okay. And you know, my house, nobody's going to be worried about paying the bills. I love horse racing. I love it. I love the pageantry of it. I love the derby. I love the hats, the colors. I just think it's beautiful. I cut my teeth on horse racing from as far back as I can remember. We had family that lived really close to Ellis Park, and 2 or 3 times a summer, my parents would, I'm an only child, they'd pack me up, and we'd go to their house, and we would go to Ellis Park. I thought the fun thing of going to Ellis Park was when the tickets were no good and the gamblers, or the bettors, they just throw them down on the ground. I like to go around and collect all the different colored tickets. My parents took, and this would have been a long time ago. I won't tell you how many years, a long time ago. Before a lot of you were around. My parents took $20. There were 10 races. They bet $2 on a race. Nobody ever worried about that money. It wasn't to pay for the house. We didn't have to pay a car payment with it. It wasn't food. That was fun. It was that night at the movies, the dinner out. It was entertainment. But I loved horse racing. I still love horse racing. But I know that if I go horse racing, I'm going to take $20 and probably bet 6 of it and take the rest of it back home because I don't want the negative consequences of it. But that was a family that educated me on this is fun. This is not what we do to make money. We go when we have fun. Gambling and elder abuse. There's a couple of things I wanted to highlight with that. Financial exploitation of vulnerable adults is on the rise and often with a gambling connection. I don't think we hear a lot about this, and it's really more than I think we give credit to. In many cases, the victim, the elder, is bedridden or living in a nursing facility and not a gambler. Oftentimes, the perpetrator, the gambler, is a trusted family member or friend who has power of attorney over the victim's financial affairs and uses that to withdraw funds and spend the money on gambling. The victim is left with very little due to the addiction of the perpetrator, who sometimes justifies the criminal act by the assumption that they would just inherit the money anyway. This is hard to uncover, it's hard to spot, but it's out there, and I want you to be aware of it. Coping strategies. More likely to use coping strategies that involve change to the amount of excessive gambling. We see them in their end stages of gambling, changing the kind of gambling that they're doing from maybe an action game to an escape game or vice versa. They will change the amount. They will be chasing. They will be committing illegal acts. They will begin to make threats and ultimatums. In 2001 study listed effective coping strategies such as setting boundaries and limits, finding spirituality, church. These are good things that your family can do to set you up to try to help you to stop your gambling. Family programming, I mentioned this already. Good luck at getting the family to come in. I have had a few significant others, or I've had children of parents I've had adult children of older parents. I've treated a lot of older people for gambling. It's probably more my specialty than the young ones. I'm getting a lot of sports gambling now, but I've had older casino women. But I've had their adult children come in and get them involved. I'm treating a couple right now, and she called, and she got him in to see me, And he owned up to it. He did a lot of minimizing while she was there. If I get her out of the room, he's a whole different person. And he's done a lot of changing. He's made a lot of positive steps forward. He hasn't gambled now in about 3 months, so I'm very proud of him. But the minute she wants to come into the session, the minute she comes in the session, he's a whole different person, to the point where I didn't even let her come back the last time. He tries really hard to please her, and she can push his buttons really quick in session, so I've put a stop to that. But try to get some family programming. If you're interested in trying to work with families, Oregon has some of the best research out there that you can access online about working with families. Warning, warning, warning. Make sure you know that it's safe in that home before you try to talk to the two of them together. Engage the children if you can. Never, ever, ever put her into a situation, the victim, into a situation where she can get hurt worse. I want to briefly mention pressure relief meetings, and this is a special kind of a GA meeting where if you are committed to stopping gambling, you get back into recovery, a little bit into your going to GA, they will invite you to come in, bring your finances with you. You will sit with a couple of trusted GA members. They will help you restructure your financial situation and get you on the right path, getting things paid back. GA does not want bankruptcy. They want you to pay, even the bookies, they want you to do this, but they don't want your family to go without. They're not the ones that caused this. So they restructure things in a workable plan. Towards the end of the plan, though, they're going to let somebody, most of the time they're going to let somebody be in charge of the finances in the home. And that's a risky thing to me. That's setting up somebody, whether it's a parent or I'm working with somebody right now where the parent's in charge of the adult son's money. In the house where the lady kind of nags on him, she's in charge of the money. And she won't even let him have a flip phone. And he just says, I just want a phone. I don't have to have anything fancy. Finally, I just flat out told her the last session, I said, let him have a phone. That's a safety issue. Let him have a phone. But she got so much control. Getting that control by one person who may have been the survivor of violence for months and years, that could be a bad situation. So be aware of that. We've talked about this before, the risk involved. Make sure the kids are in a safe situation. Be aware of the risk of family conflicts going on. Be aware of the risk of suicides that happen. I have always, and Dr. Whelan used a different number this morning. I have always said 20% will attempt or complete and die by suicide, which is extremely high. It's highest of any mental health disorder that I'm aware of. He threw out the figure 30%. And my bottom line to this is every time you have, and I say this in almost every training that I do, every time you have a gambler in your office, you need to be doing a suicide risk assessment. If you're not, I think you're getting yourself set up for trouble. Culturally speaking, when we're talking about families and how families get along and how you interact with the different family members, be culturally aware. How they view family may be different. That culture may be different than how we view families here in America. Where do we go from here? Jeremy mentioned it. Adopting a public health lens is recommended to broaden research focus from victims and perpetrators and to consider the contextual factors. We have got to look at gambling as America's most undiagnosed mental health disorder. If I was in church, that would deserve an amen. Thank you. That's what our preacher does anyway. That deserves an amen. In conclusion, it's critical to involve the family in the recovery of the gambler. An individual's success is less likely if the person's relationships are not effectively taken into account. You have to deal with the family. It's important to gain their perspective. And that's it. So thank you. I'm going to have our special guests come up here, and I'm not sure if all three of them are coming. We're going to let Elliot Rappaport come up here, and he is with Birches, and he has a table with some information about Birches in the back. And this is, I'm going to let him tell you about what all they do. But Elliot and I have been communicating for a few months now, and I asked him on a Zoom call we had about a month ago, I said, we've had people asking about the banning, different apps for banning people. I have used them and found a lot of success with them. And so I said, can you talk some about them? And he's not gonna like buy this one, buy that one. He's just gonna tell you some pros and cons, I think. So I'm gonna turn it over to him, and thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. Testing 1, testing 2.
Awesome.
Perfect. So, great to see everyone, and wonderful to see everyone online too, I guess. I'll spend the next 5 or 10 minutes just talking a little bit about what I believe is kind of the future of virtual clinical treatment for gambling disorder. And I'll intro, of course, on myself too. No slides, but I'll be around today and tomorrow. And so I'll mention some names on the platforms which we use. And then, of course, more than happy to do a deep dive on anything at your guys' convenience. So quick background on myself first. I'm the founder of a national provider of virtual treatment for gambling disorder called Birches Health. And we're very fortunate to be here and working with Dr. Clark, with Mike, who just came in, I saw, and then with other members of the council too, as well as in many other states. And I think what's been very interesting is that as gambling, of course, and gaming too has gone online, so too must treatment in some ways. And so we operate a fully telehealth, a fully virtual clinical model. And we find often that we are able to reach individuals in rural areas, in underserved areas through this virtual model, but also too, of course, that because it is online and there's significant co-occurrings between gambling disorder and other behavioral and process addictions, individuals need to establish a healthy relationship with digital means. An anecdote we heard recently from an individual who's in our patient population who has a co-occurring SUD and gambling disorder diagnosis, though he's in recovery for SUD, was that opening up Instagram and seeing advertisements was like someone walking by and offering him a drink every 5 minutes or so. And so I think the online world, the worlds of gambling, the worlds of gaming are really blending like never before. There's a game, I think, which is an interesting, perhaps, an interesting microcosmic example of this. It's a social casino. It's been around for about 10 years. Let me actually ask very quickly, when I say the word loot boxes, do people know? People know, I say, but before I even finish, there we go. And then social casinos, do people know what, no? Okay, great, I see some nodding heads, fantastic. So I think CoinMaster in particular is a very fascinating case study of what this social casino is that blends online gambling and online gaming. And for those who don't know, social casinos, they're online games that basically simulate traditional casino experiences, but they don't directly involve real money wagering. So games are often free to play, they're using virtual currency, but real money can be used to purchase these currencies, you know, whether they're coins or treasures or gems or what points, whatever it is. And then there's also this very exaggerated social media flywheel where players can compete against friends, can share their wins on social media, And these experiences are really more like video games, and it's very performative socially. And so Coinmaster, this one in particular, has been downloaded over 300 million times since its 2015 release. And the core flywheel, though, it's tied to a slot machine mechanism. Players spin a slot machine, of course, betting more spins to generate different rewards and different outcomes for a customizable home base. Each spin results in a different outcome, of course, and these can be gaining these coins, attacking someone else, defending your base. And as you spin more, of course, you get more coins, and you can advance the narrative in that fashion. This is light years away from a traditional slot machine motion, with the idea that you pull a lever, lights go off, you hope to win. And so as a core gaming mechanism, these are very addictive qualities. And again, the final thing I'll say on this is that Coinmaster bills itself, as many social casinos, as a free-to-play game. In the majority of jurisdictions that it operates, it has an age rating of 9-year-olds plus. So we need to focus, I believe, on a wraparound clinical model. Direct clinical intervention, but then also digital support. And direct clinical intervention, whether it's once a day, once a week, once a month, we need to ensure that individuals are empowered, of course, at the top of the funnel, so to speak, to ensure that they don't even see a lot, they don't even have access to a lot of the online platforms. So I'll speak very quickly about two specific and crucial tools which we utilize in our own clinical program. Digital blocking tools, and then I'll hand it off to Jonathan to talk a little bit about self-exclusion. But so digital blocking tools in particular, these are digital tools which individuals who are actively betting online can download to block specific online gambling and gaming platforms. The three in particular, which we often use and recommend to clients, and of course, please note this is not a recommendation of any of them, of course, just ones we use. One is called Gamban, the other is called Bet Blocker, and then the third is called Net Nanny. And in particular, I think these three tools have really developed a digital platform which helps individuals who are spending a lot of time on their phones focus on removing potential at-risk behaviors and reduces the opportunity for gambling-related harms. One potential flag I will always give to link this back to my commentary about social casinos, though, is that for all prevention, awareness, education, and treatment specialists, as well as, of course, the legal and online regulated gambling and gaming industries, there's also kind of the bogeyman in many ways of the black market and the gray market. And so legal online gambling can be blocked through tools such as these. But what's often harder and what often falls through the cracks are these social casinos, are of course the loot boxes, are the sweepstakes platforms and the offshore betting platforms. And so, an example which has been in the news recently, I imagine a lot of individuals in the room might have heard of the online platform called Kalshi, which is a predictions market, as they call it. And of course, it's not gambling, it is prediction markets. And they offer the ability to predict outcomes on sporting events across all 50 states. And again, it's not gambling, it's predicting. So I think the most important focus for counselors who are seeing individuals who have gambled on and sports bet online and who are using tools like these digital blocking platforms is to continue to build a therapeutic alliance and continue to participate and keep open the dialogue with your clients and with affected individuals, with their families too. Because understanding the challenges that they are facing in their day-to-day, even opening up their phones, pulling up Instagram, will enable you to best empower them to begin recovery and really to remove themselves from these platforms. And I will hand it over to Jonathan to talk about self-exclusion now. And I'm happy to take a question, of course. Of course, Gamban, Gamban, Bet Blocker, BLOCKER, and then NET, N-E-T, nanny, N-A-N-N-Y. And I'd love to hear if anyone else has any ones which they recommend too, because there are a couple of them, but those are just the three which we often utilize.
Well, I was going to suggest some that are also beneficial are, depending on the browser you use, you can install certain plugins that will look for certain words that will occur in a website. So that way, you're not only blocking from the specific, like maybe website or app of choice, but you're blocking any potential trigger that could lead to that type of behavior or compulsion.
Completely. And again, as soon as the family member, if it is correct, or an affected individual can be introduced into the clinical program, that especially very much helps its tailwinds on that, I think. So I think that's a great flag too.
And don't let the person with the issue set the password themselves. You set it for them, and then you throw away the password. Can't unlock it, so you don't have to worry about any type of manipulation or anything like that.
Thank you for the time. And I'll be here late today and tomorrow.
I will introduce myself. I'm Marlene Warner. Good afternoon, and I'm from Massachusetts. I work at the Massachusetts Council on Gaming and Health, and through our organization, we do a number of things, one of which is consult with companies that are working on solutions for people. So I've been working with Jonathan, and I'll let him introduce himself in a moment, around national voluntary self-exclusion. I have been in this field for quite a long time, and I think one of the things that has been hardest for me is to figure out how you can help people when they voluntarily self-exclude and do so in a really robust program in your state, but can drive 1 hour over the border and get to the next state. And I think this is one of the things, Jonathan will talk a little bit more about what his company does, but we started working on a different topic, and I said, like, this is something we really struggle with. So, you know, when you all are doing the really amazing, important work you're doing, which is connecting with clients, you need to have these outside tools. So I'm so glad, you know, Elliot was able to talk about software. And I think one of the other things is when that urge comes up, and that will happen, right? You all can talk about it. You probably do point them in direction of some urge surfing opportunities online. But voluntarily self-excluding from all the various ways, not just the casinos, not just the sports wagering apps, but being able to do it exclusively in a region or even nationally, I think is really pretty key. So I'm just here to support that effort, happy to talk with folks kind of practically in terms of how that works. And one of the reasons I'm interested in doing this is because I really think that we need to give people these additional tools. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Marlene, and thanks for having me today. And I realize I'm the only thing separating you from chocolate chip cookies, so I'll stay on time. But I'm here today to talk about the National Voluntary Self-Exclusion Program. And what is that? So as Marlene said, there's no straightforward way to voluntarily self-exclude, not just across states, but even within states. So if we think about all the different forms of gambling that were mentioned earlier today, what we see is people often will self-exclude from one and gravitate towards another and just continue on the pathway that they were, just through a different vehicle. So what we're trying to do is actually give people a way to get more broad protection within state, within different products, within that state, and then across state lines. And I'll show you a map later, a few slides down in this presentation, that shows just how close the casinos are to the Kentucky border. And Marlene, being from Massachusetts, there was just a casino built in New Hampshire where the parking lot is actually in Massachusetts. So you can park in Massachusetts, walk across the border, and gamble in New Hampshire. So for people who have self-excluded in Massachusetts, what was the point at that point? So people who do self-exclude often travel further, just spend more on gas money, so they're not just losing gambling, they're spending more to travel. they're spending more time away from home. And we've noticed that in the people we've helped self-exclude, 40% of them have actually chosen multiple states to self-exclude from. So people will use this option if it's available. So to start, I just want to share a couple stories. This came from a game sense advisor in Massachusetts who met with someone. It was a young man in his 20s who told me he had been driving around for the last 2 days all along the East Coast doing exclusions everywhere. I was his last stop before returning to New York. He'd gone everywhere from Maryland up through Atlantic City into Connecticut and Rhode Island and Massachusetts. He'd already excluded in New York. He made a trip out of the whole thing and got it all done regionally in a couple of days. They had a nice chat and celebration because he'd done his last casino in state and was headed home. So as you can imagine, not everyone can take 2 days out of their work schedule to complete this journey across a region of the United States to complete all these self-exclusions. But for this person, that's what they actually needed to be able to get that protection for themselves. And secondly, this is a woman we actually met. Marlene and I travel all over the country talking about this program now, and we were in New Mexico renting a car, and the attendant just asked, what are you doing in New Mexico? Which I guess is a reasonable question to ask. They don't get too many people coming to Albuquerque. Santa Fe is a more touristy destination, but we told her we help people stop gambling, and she said she had just banned herself from all the casinos in New Mexico. But she didn't know that there was actually a statewide program, so she was driving casino to casino. Nobody told her that there was one until eventually she did stop at a property and got the statewide form and filled it out. She then proceeded to start spending $300 a trip on scratch cards. So the lottery doesn't have a self-exclusion in many states. New Mexico is one of those states. But she admitted she couldn't afford the scratch cards, but they were everywhere, and there wasn't a way to self-exclude from them. So the goal of all this is to help people like this to not have to go through these experiences and just get a simple way to self-exclude. So our website is live. It's at www.nvsep.org. And right now you can get self-exclusion help in 4 states, which are California, Colorado, Iowa, and Michigan. And we're about to launch self-exclusion from fantasy sports, which is another thing people have issues with, in Nebraska and New Mexico. So we're expanding pretty quickly. All these states have launched in the last several months, and we have a big roadmap ahead. As you'll see here, Wisconsin will be launching this month, which is actually a tribal casino state. So tribal casinos, not something you have in Kentucky, but they're often outside of the state programs for self-exclusion because the state doesn't have jurisdiction over tribal gaming. But we've worked with national tribal leaders to set up a program nationally where we will be able to offer self-exclusion from tribal casinos. So by September 2025, we'll be in 40+ states. This is primarily with fantasy sports self-exclusion. As you can see, Kentucky here is one of those states where we'll be able to offer self-exclusion from all the fantasy sports apps so that people don't have to go app by app to complete that process. And I promised you a map, so here it is. Kentucky is bordered by all gaming states. And it's no accident that there are casinos. These blue points are casinos all along the border. So our friends in Tennessee, as Dr. Whelan is from, don't have casinos, so that's why you don't see any on the southern border. But all along the other borders, you see casinos peppered all over. So people in other states realize there aren't casinos here in the natural sense that they are in other states. And businesses know that if they put them as close as they can, sometimes even with parking lots in other states, people will come to them for the convenience of being right there. I think we have one just a couple miles up the road in Ohio from where we're sitting today. So when we look at Kentucky, there's no way currently to self-exclude across the gaming operators. I believe there are 8 apps for sports betting right now. And in order to self-exclude, you actually have to create an account at each app. Then you have to self-exclude. So when you create an account, what's going to happen? You're going to get a pop-up, hey, $500 free bet. So you have many opportunities to change your mind before self-excluding if you have to actually create an account to do so. And in other states, it's not any better. You might have to go into a casino, into the security office, as was mentioned earlier as well. In Louisiana, you have to meet with law enforcement. So imagine, you're thinking about self-excluding and you find out, oh, I have to go down, meet with law enforcement and face a police officer where, that might not be something you typically encounter as part of your daily life. So making it easier that you can do this online, you can do this from home, all the verification is there, and ability to do that online is possible now. iLottery, another thing in Kentucky, that offers a separate self-exclusion program, so they'll deactivate your account if you ask them to. But you, again, have to do it separately from the sports betting, and there's no way to do it for historical horse racing machines, currently with fantasy sports or other additional forms of gambling. So it's a mountain to climb to self-exclude from all these different forms of gambling, and what we're trying to do is just make that one step and get it all done. I kind of talked about that, so I'll skip forward in the interest of the cookies. So lots of information without confusion. So if you look here at this little picture here, different states, different forms of gambling in each state, all those will be pre-selected for people, but let's say, for example, they make a trip down to Louisiana once a year with their family. They want to be able to put a few dollars down at the tribal casino. We allow them to have that flexibility. We don't want it to be a blanket exclusion for people because that will turn some people away. So we found that giving people flexibility makes the participation increase and helps more people. But with all this, if you've ever seen a self-exclusion form, it's basically like signing a legal document. There's a lot of language in there that's not easily understandable. So we provide all that information summarized in bullet points on each state, what it means. Will you be arrested if you show up at the casino? What are the different term lengths, 1 year, 5 year? Each state's a little bit different. So having a place to go to see all that information across states is really critical for informing people to make decisions that work for them. And then we also connect to resources. So for example, if you want to seek treatment on our website, you can actually, shout out to Elliot, there's a link to Birch's Health where you can look for online treatment options as well. So we put links to the local resources as well as national ones. There's also ways to contact us directly and just talk if you just want to learn about the options and things like that. And lastly, I'll just show you how it works. So the question we often get is, how do you know that that's the person that wants to self-exclude and they're not just signing up a spouse? So hopefully this will work, because I know we've been having, oh, great, it's working. So the first thing you do is provide an email, and that allows you to come back and finish if you don't finish in one go, but also get information that's specific to what you've self-excluded from. So once you do that, we have to make sure that the person signing up is who they say they are. And that's a two-step process. So the first step is to scan a government form of ID in your camera on the phone. You can use a driver's license, a passport, any government-issued ID. And you take a picture of that with your camera phone. We blurred this one out because I didn't want to broadcast my colleague's driver's license across the internet. But that verifies that it's not a fake ID. And the second step is to take a selfie from the front and from each angle. So 3 quick ones here. That was 1, 2, and 3. And that completes the verification process, which matches that individual to their picture in the driver's license. So we know that person has the ID, and we know they have the driver's license, and from there, they can go ahead and self-exclude wherever they want to. So thank you for having me here, and if anybody has any questions, happy to take those, and then cookies on the other side of that. Yes, Chris?
In Indiana, when you sign up for the voluntary exclusion program, a lot of times we had to tell people that if you exclude in Indiana at some casinos, they will exclude you throughout the entire United States.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with that?
Sure, and so we do relay that information when people are signing up. So if they choose a state, like let's say Arkansas, that has no national operators, it's all contained within Arkansas, they won't be presented with that information. But if they choose a state like Kentucky that has MGM, FanDuel, those policies extend nationally, and we tell them that those will be extended. So for FanDuel, it's not as important, but for ones that have properties in other states that people may visit and find out that they excluded themselves when presented by security or something like that, that's not a surprise people want to have. So we make sure that when they're signing up, they have that information depending on which states they've selected.
Okay, and then can you give your, the website?
Yes, it's NV, so National Voluntary SEP, Self-Exclusion Program, so nvsep.org.
Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
I'm kind of fascinated by self-exclusion. I've only just learned about it recently. I did not realize that it was as seriously binding. Are you suggesting that if someone self-excludes from a casino that there's no going back for a period of time? Like they can't
Yes.
come in and-
Yes, so the question is, if you self-exclude, is there any way to reverse that decision within the time frame?
So,
Right.
official.
So no, it's a very official document. It's often, in some states, notarized document. They have a lot of legalese in there, which is part of the issue of people not understanding what they're signing up for that we're trying to solve. But once you self-exclude, that's it for the time you selected. So if it's 1 year, you can't undo it. If it's 5 year, it's 5 years. If you choose a lifetime option, some states do allow you after 5 years or so to undo that decision. There's a process usually for that where you have to meet with people. You may need to meet with a clinician and they may have to sign off that you no longer have a gambling problem, which I don't think many would be the signature that, or would want to be that signature. But there's a process after the time period to come off in a lot of states. It doesn't just expire, but in some states it does. So confusing for a lot of people. Sure.
And I guess one of the things I'll just say to that is that right now, what happens is that people leave with like paperwork that inevitably in 3 days, they don't know where the paperwork is, right? They're usually in some form of crisis when they're voluntarily self-excluding. So I think one of the things that's nice about this is that you can go back and reference the materials, the terms and conditions you signed off on. You can look at any, if MGM builds a new property, you can see that that property's been added and you are now on an additional property self-exclusion. It keeps up with the information versus the person having to be responsible for that, which is frankly what we tell people they have to do right now.
Yeah.
So I think that's another nice perk of this.
Yes.
First, thank you so much. I'm thrilled to see that you're doing this, and I know how difficult it is. And just really will volunteer to do anything I can to support getting more states involved in lotteries and such. In the current climate, especially, it's kind of the perfect storm of folks with gambling that have had to hide the gambling just to keep it surviving. There's a lot of secrecy, and now combined with data privacy issues and even HIPAA-type issues, not feeling very safe, that we're unclear if our health records can affect us in the future. For insurance, I've self-excluded before, where I had to say I am a problem gambler, and I kind of objected to having, I think I should be able to self-exclude for any reason,
Right.
rather than saying I have a mental health diagnosis. So I just wonder if that's come up at all, it's something you're thinking about, and I'm not doing that to in any way diminish the effort. I just think it's probably something you're already in front of.
Right. No, that's a great question, and it comes up on every call. So thank you for raising that one. So the importance of keeping the self-exclusion list private is paramount to the value of the program. So if you had a program where, suddenly everyone's name was exposed, nobody would sign up ever again. So the first thing we do is talk about how this list is protected with the regulators that we work with. You'd be surprised right now that a lot of states just work with sending around files of, CSV files with names and things like that. So this is a big improvement where everything is encrypted. So anytime information is shared, it's encrypted. If it's stored, it's encrypted. It's a big improvement to the current way that things are done, which is often just sharing lists around and emailing them around and having a place that you can just download them onto your computer. So yes, we take that privacy extremely seriously, and we make sure that we dot all the i's and cross all the t's with the state to make sure that not only do we protect it, but that that information isn't subject to FOIA requests or, you know, Freedom of Information Act, that it can be requested by outside parties. So it's protected, it's in a bubble within the state, and then with us, it's encrypted and protected there. Sure.
Let's take 15 minutes to get those cookies that Jonathan mentioned. Thank you. don't they? They're pretty good. Okay, thank you for coming back so quickly. As I said, we're running a few minutes behind, but we're going to catch up. I have the honor of presenting our next speaker, and he is a very dear friend, probably one of the most gentle and kind men that I have ever encountered. He's just a real special guy. This is Dr. Scott Hunt. He is the Associate Dean of the College of Justice, Safety, and Military Science at Eastern Kentucky University. We have presented together many, many times. He is a wealth of knowledge, full of statistics, and I hope you will give him your attention and enjoy his presentation.
I'm full of something, but what it is. Just a little introduction. Yeah, I'm the Associate Dean in the College of Justice, Safety, Military Science. I've been kind of at this academic stuff as a professor for about 35 years. So I took my degree and PhD in sociology in the previous century, not a century ago, in case you're wondering. It's been a while. And I've kind of stumbled into this topic and made some great friends, and I really enjoy doing this. You'll see in this presentation that there's a mistake. We'll correct the mistake. Jeremy's going to help me, and we'll figure that out. And I wanted to say, Mike Stone told me an amusing thing, and I wanted to share it. He said that he was like at a party or something, and he had there was an anesthesiologist there, and they were talking, and person's thanks. He's just handy. Said, oh, an anesthesiologist, that's very interesting, must be very challenging. I suppose it's very difficult to put people to sleep. And he said, no, actually, it's easy to put them to sleep. It's getting them up that's the hard part. And it's sort of like doing a talk after lunch at 3 o'clock. It's going to be really easy to put you to sleep. And I will wake you if you do, after we're done. This morning with Dr. Whalen, I thought it was good to start with the definition. That's just kind of a good place to start. And gambling is the act of risking something of value. Does it have to be money? No. On an uncertain chance. If it's not an uncertain chance, it's not gambling, right? If it's a known outcome. An uncertain chance of winning a larger amount of money or whatever's bet or some other good. So it's pretty basic, and we've already had some discussion about how broad what that could encompass. Lots and lots of different things. And gambling may involve some elements of skill. You can bet on golf, and golf does take some skill, or bowling and so on, or cards. You're playing poker, there takes some skill. It can involve skill. It's not all gambling is entirely chance. Or it can be determined by pure chance, like slot machines and lottery and that sort of thing. So different ways. The part of what I'm supposed to do here is a learning objective is prevalence studies. Dr. Whalen mentioned that this morning, and he said everything I'm going to say, so I'm done. And actually, he did say everything I'm going to say. I'm just going to say it again. Some of the numbers and things, but go a little more in depth into it, I guess. A prevalence is an estimate. Right? Statistics is departure from chance. It's an estimate. Sometimes we get wrapped around the axle that, well, that doesn't always work that way. That's right. It's kind of an estimate, and it's probability. Some do, some don't. Right? So prevalence is an estimate of the proportion of a population, so we have to identify what the population is, who have a specific characteristic. This time we're interested in addictive gambling, problem gambling, yeah. So, but some characteristic in a given time period. And so you could be interested in problem gamblers last week, the week after the Super Bowl, or you could the last 12 months, or you could do a lifetime. Lifetime prevalence studies are nice because it gives you a picture of those who have had or are having some problem. It's the biggest net you could cast, and you'd want to know that. You'd want to know who's having problems, who's had problems, what is the lifetime of problem gambling. Oops, I'm sorry. That shouldn't have popped up there. All right, and that's from the Institute of Mental Health there. So to estimate prevalence, this is a big task, right? We got a population, and when we start talking about populations, you could be talking about Richmond, Kentucky. You could be talking about your neighborhood association. You could be talking about something as big as a country or a continent, right? It gets kind of daunting when you start getting bigger things to estimate. So it's just estimates of a population, and we can't ask everybody in big populations. It's just impossible to take a questionnaire to somebody in the United States. Every adult in the United States, you can't do it. Can't do that reasonably. So you do a sample. And I won't bore you with all the scientific stuff about sample. There's ways to draw good samples. We get kind of jaded in this day and age. You know, we got these surveys and they don't interview me and they're no good. That's what I tell my students is, you're not going to be a researcher. You don't need to know the ins and outs, but you need to be good consumers. What makes the difference between a good sample and a bad one? Any guesses? I bet you know. I know you know.
How random it is?
How random it is. Everybody.
Self-selected or not self-selected?
Yeah, right. Is it self-selected, a convenience sample, or does everybody in the population have an equal chance of being selected for the survey? Not everyone's selected, but everyone has an equal chance. Absolutely right. That's number one. There's size. Those are the two things. I knew you knew. All right? Two things. So using random selection increases the chances that the sample will be representative of the bigger thing. It's not the bigger thing. It's representative of the bigger thing, and we can design confidence intervals around that, how confident we are we got a good sample and all that sort of thing. I'm going to make a brief side note. There's a thing that you all have that have made survey research very difficult, and you have it with you right now. You know what it is? Your cell phone. During the 50s and 60s, in survey research, we got these phone numbers. We can randomly dial. We don't even have to use a phone book. We can just randomly dial numbers in a specific what? Area code to get people in this area code, that area code. We want some from the Louisville area. So on. Cell phones, you can live in Kentucky and have a cell phone with an area code from California. This has made that irrelevant, and survey researchers are struggling to figure out what to do next, because there's not a good way to do the random dialing. People throw away the mail, so we're kind of in a precipice there. But anyways, that's how we do our sampling and whatnot. And prevalence may be reported in different ways. It can be just a straight percentage. 5% of the population does X, Y, or Z. Or it can be, 100 out of 100,000 people. It's the same thing. It's just different ways to present the same data. It's not like the presentation of the numbers makes a different type of prevalence. That's not the case. It's just different ways to present the numbers. We're going to talk about percentages because I think it's the most intuitive things to do. Lifetime. So very simple question. Have you ever felt the need to bet more and more money? Comes from the live bet, right? Pretty good indicator of maybe a problem. And the part about the lifetime, let's see if I can do this, probably not, is have you ever? If we were interested in the last 12 months, in the last 12 months, have you ever felt the need, right? If you did the last 12 months, you might miss somebody that is in recovery, but is considered a problem gambler, right? We want that net big. So have you ever did this? You can use whatever instrument you want. Live bet's a good one because it's cheap, 2 questions. Prevalence studies, we're going to see in a sec, are expensive. They're greedy little things, and when you get a good one, hang on to it. And Dr. Whalen mentioned the Lancet study, a meta study, a study of studies. They grab the ones that they have. And we'll come back to the results because Lancet repeated what I'm going to put up here. A random sample, one in which the characteristics of the individuals in the sample closely match the population. So what sort of things would we want them to match on? What's that? Age. Age, yeah, amen to that, brother. Age. Gender. Income level. Geographic location, that's that whole area code problem. Right, there's all these things. And so we can design a survey that will enhance our chances of having a representative sample across the whole, whatever we're generalizing to, usually a country. So we want our sample to be a mini version of the population as a whole. The reason we want a representative sample is it allows us to generalize. We can go from the sample and generalize to the population if the sample is representative of the population. We cannot do that if it's not. And so sometimes I get in trouble with groups like this. This is the problem with clinical studies. Clinical studies are great. In-depth, small samples, not necessarily representative of the population as a whole. You can't really generalize. There's limits to how you can talk about it. So prevalence studies, it's very powerful because you can say, this is what the population looks like. I can generalize. I'll give you an example from long ago when I was working on a project. We were working on a project, a longitudinal study, which is studying, there's different types. We were studying the same children from 8th grade till 2 years after high school. And it just kicked off. I was at the beginning of it, and it was 8th graders. I went to one school, I turned my back, and they had those recyclable pencils, and I was getting pelted with pieces of pencil. It was hazardous duty pay. So we got the results, first year, 8th graders. The sample frame, where we drew our sample, was 8th graders from public schools. And we're sitting around, we're going to write up our results, and my co-workers said, 8th graders, our data suggests 8th graders do X, Y, and Z risky behaviors. And I said, you can't say that. And they weren't happy with me, because that was the big bang for the buck, right? 8th graders do this. Why couldn't we say that? We didn't survey private school. We didn't survey homeschoolers. We surveyed just in Kentucky. I don't know what it's like in Washington State. What we could reasonably say was our sample suggests that public school 8th graders in Kentucky do this. So we should take that very seriously, because bad uses of statistics doesn't mean statistics are bad. It's just bad use of a good tool. You know, use a shovel for a hammer, you're not going to get good results. So this is important, kind of technical stuff. It's highly important if we hope to use findings to shape policy. Policymakers want generalizable studies. What do the people in my district think? What do the people in my state think? What do the people in the country think? These are the kinds of questions they want. And if you can give them a good sample, you've got a real important piece of information for them. If you can't, you don't. And that's just the way the world works. We talked about this. You guys are smart. We can skip this slide, right? Random and large. The larger the sample, usually the better, and the more representative. There's an instance where large samples will get you, where you have to be a little more nuanced. If you have a humongous sample, you're going to find everything that is everything's going to be statistically significant, because statistical significance is driven by your sample size. You're not saying anything. What you need to look when you have these humongous samples, right? You got 10,000, 20,000 people. What you got to look at is the effect size of things. How big of an effect? And we won't get into that because that's a little more technical. But large samples in and of themselves are not a golden ticket, right? just not. But generally, large sample and random. And we talked about that, and I won't repeat that. So how big is big enough? And this, I'm going to slow down a little bit here because this is kind of an important thing to just appreciate. None of us in this room are ever going to do a prevalence study. I'm too old. Maybe Dr. Barrett will do one. I don't know. But this is something we need to appreciate. How confident do you want to be that you've captured the true population? How confident do you want to be? And there's some tools you can use. It's called power analysis, and you can plug things in and you can do that. I'm just going to give you some rules of thumb. How much error are you willing to tolerate? There's no perfect study. Any perfect people? No perfect people. Who does studies? It's people, so you're not going to have perfect studies. No perfect study. Every study has some error. I think it was referred to this morning as noise. There's noise, stuff that ain't right. Every study has it. How much of it are you willing to tolerate? Right? So there's ways that statisticians figure out how big is big enough. And we can kind of just trust for now that they do that well. But this is what I want you to appreciate. So say at the bare minimum, and this is actually true. The rest of what I'm saying is a bunch of BS, but today, this is really true. No, I'm kidding. We need about 200 individuals in a characteristic to be able to do statistical analysis at the bare minimum. Right? So if you dip below that, it's very hard to find statistical significance, even if it's there. So bare minimum of 200 of the characteristic you're interested in. What's the characteristic we're interested in? In this case here, problem gambling. So we need at least 200 of problem gamblers, right? So we want 200 people, lifetime gambling, to be part of our sample. How many Kentucky adults would we need to include in our random sample? Well, earlier today, we heard that 1% to 2% addictive gambling, right? 1% to 2%. So if you just do the math, and better check me because I proved I had problems mathing today, or at least graphing, right? I'm glad you have graphing abilities. To get one. Passion. Yeah. To get one adult with addictive gambling, we'd need to randomly sample 100 Kentuckians. 1%, right? 200, the number we want, times 100, is a sample of 20,000 people. To do a simple prevalence study in Kentucky, we'd have to get a random sample of about 20,000 people. Now, just think, if you say you're doing that all by your lonesome, and you're calling people in Kentucky, and you have to make 20,000 calls. Some will answer, some won't answer the survey. You need 20,000 surveys completed to get the 200. You call and they won't answer. I mean, I don't answer my phone. Who is that? Oh, I'll call back. Right? So if they don't answer, will you follow up? Pretty soon you start to think about the logistics of this. It takes a little army to get a very small prevalence study. And it costs money. And we heard earlier, Dr. Whalen was great, there's not a lot of money for this kind of study. Right? It's expensive, it's labor intensive, there's few of them because of it. It's a huge sample. Now, this is the bare minimum. What if you wanted to double, well, I'll put it in a negative. What if you want to reduce your chance of error? Right? What you said, random and size. Let's double our characteristic of interest. Let's get 400 people. How many people do we got to sample? 40,000 people. It's the thing I want you to take away is not the math and not the statistics. Just appreciate this is a big, hairy deal. Right? So prevalence studies, labor intensive. They're considered rare. When you get good ones, they're gold standards. Hang on to them. Prevalence studies are rare, but they tend to be the best. When we're looking at prevalence studies in Kentucky, in 2008, the council, in conjunction with the Kentucky Survey Research Center, which has closed up shop a few years ago and broke my heart, but at University of Kentucky at a survey research center, we partnered with them, we did a study. We used the DSM as our measure, and we found pretty much what the gold standards of prevalence studies found and what Dr. Whalen reported this morning from the recent study in Lancet. So, and what we're going to see is the gold standard is in the early 1990s. And it's been repeated in different countries, and again, the Lancet just reinforced the parameters, baselines. In 99, I guess I said early 99, Harvard Medical School published a meta-study of prevalence studies, and they focused on the United States and North America. So what they found, just jump to the conclusion, 1.6 on average, there's some caveats, in the United States and Canada met DSM criteria for addictive gambling. And we'll come back to that. That seems small. That's the addictive. This is folks that have multiple areas of their life with harm. Right? There's another almost 4% who met the problem gambling. They have at least one area where there's harm. These may be people that are clinical, show up in clinics. They may be subclinical. They may be avoiding people. So 5-6% of the adult population in North America, addictive problem gambling. 6 out of 100, say. You know, so that reduces, instead of 1 out of 100 like I showed earlier, that would be just for addictive gambling. 6 out of 100, you can have a little smaller sample size, but you might want to reduce your error and get 400 anyway. So anyway, that's the prevalence. This keeps coming up over and over again. Canada, United States, New Zealand, Australia. It don't matter. This is what keeps coming up. It's really kind of an interesting fact that we need to explain. Why is the general population kind of at this level consistently? So, all right. Earlier, Chris and Brian, we were talking. They said, that seems awful small. And yeah, kind of. But half of a percent has Crohn's disease. We wouldn't think Crohn's disease is inconsequential, would we? I mean, just judging by the commercials, it can't be. 1.17% motor vehicle fatalities in a population. Wouldn't think that's a small problem. Gambling, addiction, problem gambling bigger. 2.8% bipolar disorder. Stroke. COVID. Bigger than COVID. Lifetime crack use. Lifetime gambling is bigger. PTSD, very similar to problem gambling, addictive gambling. We wouldn't say PTSD is an inconsequential or small problem, right? And the reason is when you're starting to talk about like 6% of the adults in a nation, that's a boatload of people. That's a lot of people. 6 out of every 100 people you run across in a day will have PTSD, right? Or be a problem gambler. Okay, so stop right there. So that's kind of the technical side. Any questions or comments or concerns about that? And Ronsonlyn told me I had to hurry up because she gets tired of me boring the tears out of people.
Please don't listen to her.
Oh, we need to talk after this, Stephen. I'll hang out my shingle for marriage therapy. Okay, legalizing sports betting in Kentucky. Let's just take that. Social science researchers love stuff like this. It's what we call a natural experiment. We've got a condition that's introduced in a moment in time where it was not present before. And then from here on, it's present. we don't do lab work, we do surveys and stuff. This is a natural experiment. We love that stuff, right? So, just from the newspaper, to add to the Commonwealth record-breaking economic momentum, boost tourism and ensure more money, that's always good. Governor Beshear signed the House bill which legalized sports betting. You all knew that. That was 2023, not that long ago. So, like I said, natural experiment. And this is where I made a mistake, and Jeremy caught me, and I will correct it. First, so this is, I just took some selective years, months and years. This is the total helpline calls, correct?
Correct.
This line is the total of calls from a gambler, correct?
So far, yes.
So far, yes. So that's that. Now, you'll see a trend upward, right? So since sports betting here, there's been a trend upward. This is true, but this is not gamblers seeking help. There should be a third line on this,
That's correct.
and I will let Jeremy tell you what the third line is, and if you want that.
So this is a great example of what Dr. Hunt mentioned earlier of how when we're looking at data, it's very important to get the full picture. While yes, that purple line is number of people that called identifying themselves as a gambler, it is not the number of callers that identified as having a gambling problem. So, for example, the number there, 130 for June of 2024, the number of callers that actually called with an issue related to problem gambling or gambling-related harm was 38. So, significantly lower than that, by about 20%, as Dr. Wheeling pointed out earlier. What we see is 20% of persons recognize a gambling-related harm that they need help with and reach out. Unfortunately, only 10% of that 20 then actually go on to get that care. Moving on, that high point there, 249 for November of 2024, 65 called with a gambling-related, harm-related problem. In January of 2025, we're seeing 270 to 211 calls of people that identified as a gambler. 68 called with gambling-related harms. Now, very importantly here also, in January of this year, 5 of those 68 also identified as having issues. What is very interesting here, and that really does help draw attention for folks, though, is that the awareness messaging that responsible gambling programs that we're seeing on mobile advertising through DraftKings, sports betting, stuff like that, is working. People are calling. What we need to do, and again, this is kind of that hammering home point that we've been talking about throughout, is that conversation needs to also be supported by our industry, having consistent and clear messaging about the support related to gambling harms, not just if you have a problem gambling, because what we're seeing are folks calling because their problem is they can't get in their account, or they can't access the money of the winnings they just got, or they need information about the address for the casino they want to go to. Is that a problem? Well, certainly for that gambler. Is it related to a gambling-related harm? No. So it's very important that we are clear with our messaging, because otherwise, if this was to be presented to, say, like a media representative or something, what they would see is the number of calls are drastically high in Kentucky. And yeah, kinda, but it's not the full picture. And it's so important that when we present statistics, that the information that we present is reflective, so that our legislators, when we petition and show the scope of the issue, it's reliable as well. And I'll hand it off back to Dr. Hunt.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. I'd like to say I did that on purpose, but I didn't. Yeah, right. It's the point Jeremy is making here is that this top line here, this is exposure. The gap between the top and the second one, this top one is this gap rather is people that are not gamblers. All right. Where do I find the casino? I'm not a gambler. I just want.
You also need wrong numbers, hang-ups, prank calls.
Yep, right. So all of that goes in here. And this includes calls and text, chat. So this is that's general exposure. The helpline number's out there somewhere, except for the wrong numbers, right? That was just chance. But then this is the exposure among gamblers. And even though this is not people that have gambling problems, it's very good that we've moved from here to there in exposure. The 1-800-GAMBLER, they're making fun of it now. That's a good problem to have. Right before, they had no idea it existed. So now they're making fun of it. Now, if that third line was on there, it would follow a similar trend line, I'm pretty sure, at a lower level. We would still see an increase in calls from gamblers. And then what was the figure, Jeremy? 2% seek help who call?
Based on Dr. Whelan's data that he was showing, and ours kind of mirrors that, about 20% of individuals are calling with issues related to harms, and of that 20, only about 50% of that actually go on to seek help. How much of that 10% stays in treatment is anybody's guess.
That becomes a black box, because that's hard to track. But so what Jeremy is saying is that we got this line. Now, if we had the gamblers calling the helpline that have problems, that would be 20% of this trend line, right? Ish.
The average is about 53 a month from 2024.
Yeah, so somewhere in there, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And then what'd you say? 10% of, let's say it's 20 a month. Well,
So 10% of that 20 would be
2.
And 1 goes on to actually get help.
Right. So if that second line is growing, that's a good thing, because you're going to get more of the people that do have gambling problems. It's not going to be that. And sometimes in the news they'll report that, because it's 5-time increase since we've legalized sports betting. Yeah, kind of. Right? You with me? We good? Okay, good. And I'm sorry about leaving that piece of information off. Jeremy goes, that's not right. That can't be right.
You did it 100% on purpose. So
Yeah, I
we had
did.
that conversation.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, and actually, look at that. I put the same numbers the guy did. My gosh. And there's a resource there if you want to look it up. So in 2024, if we were to estimate based on census data and what we know about the prevalence of problem in addictive gambling in Kentucky, 3.5 million people in Kentucky have problem or addictive gambling. Not a small problem in Kentucky. We get, what'd you say, 20?
Yes.
Then 2. We've got a lot of work to do to get to those 3.5 million. Little bits here and there. Right? So it is a big thing. It is a very big thing. That's just adults, not children. That's is that bigger than Fayette County? It's close, right? And that's children and adults. So it's a big thing. It's a big thing. About 6%, say. All right, so there we're good there. What did I do? Go backwards? Okay. I thought. Do we have any time? Just a couple minutes. Yeah.
I may not be able to remember your exact words, but in the past you mentioned something that has been very useful to me, and that is the concept of subjective probability, which I think you defined as the probability that each individual generates based on life experience. And they asked the question, or we asked the question, how many children with autism have I seen? How many gamblers have I seen? And that is what governs our decision making. Whereas administrators look at these probabilities.
Yeah, that's right.
And to that. And I remember that in alcoholism, Father Martin used to say that someone came in and said, well, he's not that bad yet. He's not what bad yet? You're using your subjective probability.
Right.
And this is what is maddening about polling and maddening about the politicians who honestly try to use statistics, but don't understand what they're saying.
Are manipulating. Yeah,
Or
yeah.
deliberately manipulate.
Yeah, and that's why I tell my students, got to be a good consumer, because it's a good tool. You got to figure out what is not good and what is good, and really use what's good. And the subject, there ought to be a way. There's ways where that objective sort of prevalence with the subjective clinical kinds of experiences, your day-to-day experiences with family, we should be able to mesh those and line those up in some meaningful way. So like when they have committee hearings and things, yeah, get the data, the objective, but also listen to the people that experience it. I think we do that as a council when we've testified.
I think it's also useful to point out that although percentages are used all the time, there's been a 50% increase in the number of murderers who migrate through the southern border. Well, that may have been that it went from 1 to 2.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Murders are a rare event, so yeah, an increase, one like spree murder that kills 3 might double your murder in a particular area. Yeah.
Percentage, we should be very careful to cite a percentage.
Yeah, that, and one of my favorite, this is a tangent, and I'm sorry, we don't have a clock in here, but have you all seen like the FBI time clock? Every 30 seconds there's an assault and this sort of thing. Don't pay any attention to those. Because it's totally dependent upon your population size. If you were generalizing to Cedar Bluffs, Nebraska, it's been 50 years since we had whatever. If you got a population like the United States with millions and millions of people, yeah, you're going to have something happen every second of the day, right? So those are just kind of scare tactics and misuse of statistics. Yeah. Any questions or comments? We can skip the small group.
I want to make one other thing. This has been a problem for our council and for every council I've ever heard of and the National Council, of trying to be accurate without using faulty statistics. Because if you use faulty statistics and you get caught at it, then you've lost your credibility.
Absolutely.
And that, I think, one reason that we have some funding now is that we maintain our credibility with the legislature.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
By not citing inflammatory statistics.
Yep. I've spent most of my career doing small group research. I dabble into this every once in a while, but yeah. But I can't generalize from my small group. No one wants to hear me. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have time for questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Do it. Yeah.
When we mentioned the phones being a topic, and you're like, I don't answer mine. Those of us, Gen X and Boomer and above, are probably the people that actually are more likely to answer phones.
Mm-hmm.
And I always wonder about if you're setting out to speak with 20,000 people, how that cannot be self-selection when Gen Z will only communicate by text. And
Yep.
we only do flip phone or whatever. How could you possibly fold that into one of the moving variables?
That's one of the challenges being faced by survey. The people that study survey research, that's a challenge. And I'm glad you brought up the age, because, everybody's talking about AI. I'm still asking Jeeves. Nobody remembers Jeeves.
I remember.
Yeah. But that's a great point. Age is a factor. I think there's difference between urban and rural with phone use.
Availability.
Yes.
Behind the surveys of interest.
Working people retired. Right? Yeah, we're going to have to figure this out, or that whole industry in science is in trouble. Beyond me. Yes, ma'am.
In Indiana, we have finally started to conduct our own surveys regarding adults because we have a group that does children. They ask broad questions to the kids, but we finally have done adult surveys the last 4 years. And the group that we work with to do the survey has done different types of media to ask to get to our sample survey or our sample size. So they've done the internet, they've done they've done mailings, so they've done a broad, reach,
Yeah. That,
trying to get our sample size.
Yep, and I'm glad you brought up the online stuff. So that's a thing. That's one of the solutions. And back when I was in graduate school, they told us that a response rate to have a good survey needed to be about an 80% response rate. With online surveys, it's about 10%. It depends what you're asking, 10 to 15%. And what's happened, which old guy like me, right, Dr. Barrett, what's distressing is that they've lowered the bar. You know, when I learned 80%, that's the number. Believe it. Oh, 10%'s okay.
The other thing they
Yeah.
did was offer gift cards.
Yeah,
For
incentives.
all amount, but they offered them gift cards to
Yeah.
fill out the survey to get more people to fill it out.
Yeah.
It's sad
Who
as
wants
well.
gift cards? People that need money?
Yeah, well, yes, and just a second, I'll get to you. The incentives cannot be coercive,
A
and
certain type of gift
Yeah.
card, it's not just cash. that they're-
yeah, so it's kind of. I had a pair of students. They were doing some surveys in correctional facilities, and they wanted to give an incentive. Oh, you can't use that because that's contraband. Oh, we'll give them some pencils with the University of Kentucky on it. Oh, you can't do that. They'll put it in somebody's ear. It was really hard, and you can't. And you got to be real clear with people that here's the benefit you can expect, which is usually a good feeling. Yeah, that's about all you can get. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so Partner Ricochet, that's exactly what we're set up to do, is to work with youth populations as part of our focus communities. And so at the University of Kentucky, with the Empower CDC initiative, long title, UK Lines Out College Education. So we work with the ICANN and the Trinity team on tobacco cessation or prevention and cessation. And the reality is you are absolutely right. You have to communicate with people the way that they want to. As we say, boots on the ground and meet people where they are. And so what we've done with Drug Free Lakes and our coalition, so members out of the Drug Free Lakes Coalition, including Fayette County Public Schools, is I set up a program where we are in the schools every single week. And we're talking to the kids during their lunch hour, all 3 sessions, and we're surveying them with boards. And so we ask them about their perceptions,
Yeah.
and we ask them to rate their perceptions right then and there. So we're engaging them, again, boots on the ground, where they are, and you have to be innovative if you're gonna work with populations to receive that sample size.
Yep.
It's not perfect, but we're making our best effort.
Doing them, and you want to tell them the kind of hoops you got to jump through to do studies with children?
Absolutely, yeah, I mean, and so we know that obviously that you can't just survey young people without parental consent. And so we do everything anonymous with young people, and so we try to guard their person, but in the same breath, we are very sensitive, and so obviously we do the IRB at the University of Kentucky, and so we make sure we do our due diligence in relation to
Yeah.
working with
It's-
these populations.
Bottom line, it's a lot of work.
Yes.
It's rewarding work, it's necessary work, but it's hard. That's why you don't see a lot of these good studies. Good job there. Is that in public health? Is that in public health? Is that in public health, that initiative?
Yeah, so we, so I have a college education, I work in health promotion and kinesiology.
Beautiful. I'm done if you don't have any more questions. And thank you for your time and attention. I greatly appreciate it. I finished a little early.
Can you go back to one of those slides where you had the Lexington number?
She's bribing him with the gift card.
I will not answer your question. Which one?
With that Lexington number, or 6.
Oh, this one? Yeah.
Oh, it didn't.
I disconnected. I'm sorry. I'm counting that as exercise.
I do want to thank Dr. Hunt for his presentation. I wanted to point out what he had said here in the Kentucky adults. Even if we think that's a big number, and I think it's a big number, those of you that have been around for a while, do you know how many counselors we have in the state of Kentucky that are trained to see that number? There's 6 of us. There's 6 of us. and I'm old and getting ready to retire.
I think Chris is having different thoughts about that.
So, we'll talk more about this tomorrow, but I wanted to let you know that the council will be doing a 30-hour training in May. We're targeting May. Hope.
We will be discussing that tomorrow after the board meeting.
We are going to be doing a training sometime coming up. This is one of the first legs of the process to get certified. And we'll talk some more about what it takes to get certified in Kentucky. But I wanted to put it out an appeal with that big number that's there. So, thank you, Dr. Hunt. Our last presenter today, oh, before I get to introducing Emily, there was a request online. I was told that somebody wanted my email address. So I'm going to spell it. I'll say it and then I'll spell it. It's rclark@therootedrecovery.com. RCLARK at THEROOTEDRECOVERY.com. So I hope.
Did you say org or?
Com. R. Clark at the rooted, ROOTED, recovery.com. I think it's on the last page of my presentation, but just in case. So I hope whoever asked for it's still online. Our last presenter today, and that's probably just as bad as being the one after lunch, isn't it, Emily? is Emily Flath, and she is with the state. Emily has a master's in public health. She is the mental health promotion, problem gambling administrator. She is with the Promotion, Prevention, and Preparedness Branch, Division of Mental Health, Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental and Intellectual Disabilities. I'd hate to have to write that all the time. That's a lot.
I didn't have to say it. I'm glad you said it today.
So we want to welcome her. She's going to give us some updates on the funds that we have available to work for advocacy, prevention, treatment, and education.
Thank you. All right. All right. Okay. So as Ronsonlyn said, my name's Emily. I am with the Cabinet for Health and Family Services. I'm not going to say all the other words right now, but you will see me usually in one of two capacities, which is mental health promotion and then the problem gambling program. There's a lot of back and forth. In 2023, this department split into two departments. So we have the Division of Substance Use and the Division of Mental Health. We had a little bit of a hard time deciding where gambling should go, and it ended up landing with me in mental health. So I think you can make an argument either way, but I'm really excited to be working on this. My background is in substance use treatment and mental health promotion. So that's how I ended up here, and I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about what the Problem Gambling Assistance Program is and some of the things that we've been working on. And so the Problem Gambling Assistance Account was created through legislation that went into effect in September of 2023. Essentially, what the statute and then the associated regulation do is establish a fund that can be used to educate Kentuckians on safe gambling practices, the risks of developing a gambling problem, the risk factors and warning signs of a gambling problem, and available resources to reduce the consequences of gambling. I have a link to the cabinet webpage up there, so you can kind of get all that information there as well. And this is just kind of a brief walkthrough of the history of this program. So as I said, it was signed into law by the governor, actually signed into law in March 2023. And then we did a whole bunch of legislative stuff, set up a regulation that says how that fund can be used, and that went into effect in January of 2024, but we launched sports betting in September of 2023. And so since that time, we've really been focused on figuring out where to start with these funds. And so we've done a little bit of landscape analysis prior to releasing our first round of funding opportunities in October of 2024. And then we started sending out notices of award in January of this year, and we just finished reviewing all of those. We got quite a few applications. We just finished reviewing those back in February, so we're still working on contracts and notices and all those kinds of things. And we have a new funding announcement coming in like 10 minutes. So this is just kind of the revenue by quarter. So we get 2.5% of the revenue on taxes from sports wagering. And so you can just kind of see the breakdown. You can see kind of where major sporting events happen, like the Derby or the Super Bowl or March Madness, as that's kind of why you see fluctuations. You know, there's other sports like baseball that maybe don't generate as much of a bump in the funding. So as of the end of January, the total in this account was just under 1.5 million. So that wouldn't have included the Super Bowl yet. And so I'm sure there's a little bit more in there as of now, heading into March. This is just kind of what we gathered as part of our landscape analysis from multiple sources, including the KIP survey, the Kentucky Council's statistics, some stuff from the Horse Racing Commission as well. And so it's estimated that about 55% of Kentucky adult residents participate in gambling. 165,000 of those exhibit problem behavior related to gambling, with somewhere between 47,000 and 64,000 actually meeting criteria for a gambling disorder. And as Ronsonlyn just pointed out, we have fewer than 10. I didn't know it was 6, so I just kind of like put a general number in there, but fewer than 10 trained clinicians who are certified to manage problem gambling problems in the state. So as she just pointed out, that's kind of a big gap in the number of people that need help and the number of people that we have to provide high quality services to help them. And as Scott and Jeremy pointed out a minute ago, helpline calls are way up between 2023 and 2024. So that's also letting us know that this is a problem for Kentuckians. The KIP survey showed that nearly 26% of 12th graders whose schools participate in the KIP survey reported problem gambling. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Sorry, I really want to stress, like, yes, the calls have gone up. Not all of those calls are problem gambling.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes. So not all of them are people that are calling for help with this. But those calls are increasing, which is also pointing to the fact that people are becoming aware of sports wagering in Kentucky, which is a good thing as well. They may not necessarily be reaching out for assistance, but people are looking for information one way or another. So that's an important distinction also. So there's 26% of 12th graders that report gambling, and about 2% of those 12th graders report that they've had financial difficulty as a result of that gambling. So that's kids under the age of 18 for whom gambling is not legal, who are participating in this and having consequences from it. So that's kind of something that we really want to pay attention to as well. And also want to highlight that the prevalence of gambling problems in youth is twice that of those in adults. And so we really want to make sure that we're protecting the youth from these issues. And then just some other things that we've noticed: males, young adults. So you're thinking about that college age, especially in Kentucky, where college basketball is a huge deal, and the lower income individuals are also where we're seeing some of the problems. The total amount of bets placed in 2024 equals $2.63 billion. If you want to know how many sports bets were placed in that year, that's a lot of money. And so, like I said, we did our first round of notice of funding opportunities in October. and we accepted applications all the way up through February of this year. And those were specifically for strengthening the ability of the existing workforce to understand, identify, and treat problem gambling issues. And then also, we accepted proposals for the development and implementation of awareness campaigns to increase knowledge of problem gambling issues. We really wanted to start with these two places because, like we said, we need more counselors that are going to be equipped to do this work. And we also need people from a prevention standpoint to know what gambling is, what the risks are. It is a legal activity if you're over the age of 18, so we do want to put a focus on how do you do this safely as well. And so that can be part of awareness campaigns. If you're doing campaigns, we've accepted applications for campaigns for youth, and those would obviously be more focused on not gambling, as it's not a legal activity for them, or what kinds of activities that they could be involved in as far as gaming that might put them at risk. This is a little bit outdated. At the time that we created this presentation, we had received 5 proposals for the workforce development. We'd awarded 1, and we had 3 pending review. I think we've reviewed them all. I don't know that we've made announcements yet. And so I will wait to say how many there were. But as of right now, we've awarded 1. And then for public awareness and education, we received 4 applications. We've officially awarded 3 of those. We have 1 that's still under review right now. And so all of those are kind of in the process of drafting contracts and meeting with awardees and just kind of getting the work moving. But after all those funds are contracted, we anticipate about $500,000 to be spent on these proposals. And at the time that I made this, those projects were the Kentucky Council on Problem Gambling to help with this conference. A big portion of that was expanding access to this conference through the live stream and recording options. Project Ricochet is here. So they are gonna work on a public awareness campaign. They're gonna do some education materials, videos, infographics, all kinds of multimedia content. They have some art exhibits that they're gonna do. They have some really cool stuff. It was hard to fit it in this little tiny paragraph here. But we're really excited about that one. It's gonna be focusing on underrepresented populations, such as youth, veterans, minorities, and individuals with low socioeconomic status. And then we also have the Shawnee Transformation Youth Coalition, which is out of Louisville. So this campaign is going to focus on educating middle and high school students about the risks of gambling, and particularly its connections to mental health, substance use, and impulsivity, and also seeks to equip them with healthier coping strategies. And then I'll just give a shout out to the Louisville Recovery Community Connection. Is that what it stands for? Okay. I have a really hard time with acronyms. They just got their notification of award this week, and they are doing a public awareness campaign that's really going to focus on that intersection of substance use recovery and problem gambling. So I'm really excited about that one as well.
We've got somewhere around 40
Mm-hmm.
doing the live stream.
Oh, awesome. Well, that's cool. Welcome. As I said, we have a new notice of funding opportunity. It should be on the website today. If it's not, it will be up tomorrow. Sometimes we run into some issues with the changes being published. But just check this link. You can use the QR code. I also put just the URL on there. So these, again, are going to be proposals for nonprofit organizations for projects relating to public awareness and workforce development or increasing organizational capacity to provide problem gambling services. And that application deadline is going to be April 25th of this year. I'll leave that up for a second. And I think you have a copy of these slides, so you'll have that code in your little packet there as well. And then just a couple other projects I want to highlight. We have developed a problem gambling resource kit, which is available for free via the website. And then also it's on the mental health promotion resource collection that's hosted on my Google Drive. There should be a link somewhere in here to that as well. And then we also have a partnership with the Kentucky High School Athletic Association to raise awareness on problem gambling and behaviors at major high school athletic events, such as the Sweet 16 tournament that's coming up. So we'll have some messaging and things at those kinds of events as well, which is pretty exciting. And then I'll just kind of run through the resource kit really quick, just so you can kind of see what's in it. There is another QR code. I went really crazy with the QR codes. There is another code that will bring you directly to the toolkit for download. So the purpose of this kit was to educate on just general problem gambling information. What is it? What are the signs? Prevention, so making screening and diagnostic tools available to staff, partners, or clients to help identify those at risk. Connection, so providing resources to staff, partners, or people directly who may need assistance with problem gambling. And then if you have any questions, that is the official contact information for the Problem Gambling Assistance Program. It'll come to me, and so I will probably be the one answering it. But just in case I'm out, there are several other people that monitor that as well. And then I'll just kind of walk through kind of the design of the toolkit, what kinds of things are included. So we do have a general information page on just an overview of what gambling is and what kind of activities typically you would consider gambling. Bingo is a big one on there. A lot of people don't consider to be gambling. And sometimes with the sports betting, people can forget that this is not a skill, it's a game of chance. And so this handout is meant to be used to facilitate discussion on the types of activities that people are engaged in, because everyone may hear the word gambling and think something different. So we wanted to provide a definition to begin conversations. We do have a page on responsible gambling, so these are some tips to keep gambling fun. So knowing the risks before you bet, setting limits on time and money, avoiding gambling when you're experiencing stress or other mental health difficulties, being mindful of alcohol or other substance use while you're gambling, as these make it harder to stick to those limits, keeping gambling a social activity and playing for fun and not just for money. And so the intent of this handout is to be used to help, again, facilitate discussions on how to gamble safely. We also included some flawed thinking in gambling. So this page highlights common thinking errors that everyone might experience, regardless of whether or not their gambling is causing problems for them. And so these include things like, my favorite example is magical thinking. You hear this a lot in sports. If I wear the blue t-shirt, UK will win. And so just kind of making people aware that we all have these thought processes and they can lead us into potentially harmful behavior. And so again, just the purpose is to facilitate that discussion and learn how to identify these errors so that you can address them and continue to gamble safely if that is something that is safe for you. We included a page on some youth gambling and gaming. So again, highlighting that even though gambling is not legal for kids, there are still some activities that might put youth at risk. So understanding what those activities are, and just being aware of what kinds of risks teens face if they do engage in some of these activities. And this is not to say like nobody can ever do these activities, it's just a way to be more mindful. And then to go along with that, we have some tips for managing time spent gaming or gambling. It's intended for youth, but could give adults some ideas as well. I'm always looking for new hobbies. I don't know about y'all. And then we also wanted to include responsible gifting. Especially around Christmas time, I think lottery tickets can sometimes be thought of as a quick stocking stuffer. We just wanted to remind families or people who have kids in their lives that maybe necessarily aren't parents that while lottery tickets can be fun for adults, they're not an appropriate gift for kids and teens. And so just giving some ideas of other little stocking stuffers that you could do instead of a lottery ticket. Just brief overview, general education of the signs that gambling might be a problem for yourself or someone you know. Again, just intended as a general education resource to facilitate those discussions. Regaining financial security following gambling problems. So this one's intended more for someone who has experienced financial hardship as a result of their problem, or as the result of a problem in their family. Just some general starting points for how do you, in the course of your recovery, start to rebuild, because I know that's going to be a major stressor for a lot of people. So we included that. We included a little bit of information on screening and diagnostics, and we really wanted to highlight the importance of understanding that a screening tool helps you to identify risk, but is not necessarily a diagnosis. So just because you take a screening tool and it says that you might be at risk for problem gambling, you don't have to have a meltdown and go straight to the stigmatization of you definitely have a disorder. It's just a way to make you more aware of your choices. So even if you do a little bit more introspection, you don't think you have a problem, it's a way to kind of bring your attention to what kind of behaviors that you are exhibiting. And so screening tools can be administered by anyone, including yourself, so you don't necessarily have to go to a mental health provider to take a screen. So that's really what we wanted to highlight with that. That's kind of what I just said. So diagnostic tools have to be administered by a behavioral health clinician, and that's really the major difference we wanted to point out here, that these are just screens. And we gave a couple of examples, and then we ended on resources. And so we wanted to give the Helpline, GA, the Kentucky Council. I always put the Suicide Crisis Lifeline on here. And then, of course, another QR code to my website. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
You were saying that you're going to increase with the Kentucky Council, I think, through that grant, the amount of clinicians here. How is treatment being paid for? Is that coming out of those funds as well, or are you?
Right now, no, treatment is not being paid for out of the funds directly. Medicaid or private insurance would cover those, and that would be covered under mental health services. As far as I know, especially with Medicaid, there's no specific code for problem gambling. As far as billing goes, they bill that under mental health diagnosis. Yeah, Kurt?
Emily, this is not a question, but I think I rank as long of tooth and old. Look, I've earned that. And one way to earn it is go around the country and see what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. And I just think you've done a remarkable job.
Well, thank you.
It's hard to communicate what it used to be like before you took hold.
Well,
And
thank you.
it's
I'm
just
glad.
A remarkable job.
Thank you so much. And I think it's also helped that there's a dedicated person in this role now, because the department was marginally involved before, but that wasn't that girl's only job. And so while, yes, I have the mental health piece as well, this folds really well into that. And so it's kind of like I only have one job instead of 5. So I will say that has helped that process a lot as well. Go ahead.
I've got a question regarding peer support.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be a reimbursable service in the near future?
That I do not know. That would be probably more within other parts of the cabinet that would decide that. I don't get to decide what's reimbursed or not yet.
Has there been any discussion about?
Not that I've
I'm
heard
just
yet.
following through what
Yeah.
SUDS and peer support.
I know there's a lot of talk about peer support right now. I'm not up to date on exactly what they're saying, but I'll certainly kind of keep tabs on it, and I can put that on my list for things to update. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? I'm gonna get a half hour back. All right, thank y'all.
Mike, do you have any words before we leave today?
I'm worded out.
Well, we thank Emily for giving us half hour of our lives back. We will reconvene tomorrow morning. There will be breakfast, same 7:30.
7, breakfast at 7.
And we'll,
Start the program at 8, you got a choice of 2.
there'll be 2 tracks tomorrow. One will be a clinical track, and the other will be a peer support track. And that will be tomorrow's program all morning. So I hope you have a good evening, and we'll see you in the morning.